Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came in to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. What's going on, guys? Now, this is more of a kind of message to the idiots, and more specifically Colin Cowherd, because he recently had a rant. He went on a little rant on Fox Sports. So I want to play the clip if you guys haven't heard it before I get into it. Basically, he compares on the heels of the Conor McGregor Nate Diaz pay-per-view, which did really well. It did over 1.6 or 1.3 million pay-per-view wise, and generated the highest purses for McGregor and Diaz, the highest purses in UFC history. McGregor got $3 million. Nate Diaz got $2 million, which is crazy to me. But anyway, here's the clip, and I'm going to give you my thoughts after the clip. So here's what Colin Cowherd had to say in regards to the Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor fight.
Diaz McGregor is our Ali Frazier. Best fight I've seen maybe in 20 years. There were a lot of life lessons in that fight. Courage, gut, toughness, passion. The first two rounds, Conor McGregor destroyed Nate Diaz. In the third round, Nate Diaz summoned something that Joe Frazier and Ali summoned. And Nate Diaz took the fight over in the third. And Conor McGregor suddenly was against the cage and down to his last couple of punches. He grabbed on, held on to the fourth round. From that point on, McGregor had nothing left, was repeatedly staring at the clock. Diaz was drenched in blood. McGregor was the Ali, the showman. Diaz was Joe Frazier, the toughest guy in the neighborhood. Saturday night by 9:30 Pacific, boxing died. That was the final nail in the coffin.
Alright, so there you have it. Boxing is dead. That's what Colin Cowherd said. And this is a narrative that has been going on for many years. I would probably say since the mid-2000s I've heard ESPN and many big-time sport networks like say that boxing is dead, which to me is ridiculous because this is why. UFC, while it just sold for $1 billion or whatever it was, look at what the fighters are making. I mean, the fighters are very undercompensated for the kind of punishment they're taking in the ring. I mean, McGregor and Diaz made a combined $5 million, and that was arguably the biggest pay-per-view in the history of UFC. You could argue that. In boxing, I mean, you got guys like Eddie Lara who are fighting bums for like that amount of money. So I don't think you can say the sport is dead when it still generates more money for its own athletes than the UFC. Boxing being dead. I mean, I heard that and I was crazy. Now you gotta understand Colin Cowherd. Colin Cowherd is not a very smart guy, to be honest with you. He's not a very smart guy because this is the same guy who I once heard in 2009 on an ESPN radio show. He compared Dwayne Wade and LeBron James to food. He said LeBron James was a 5-course meal and Dwayne Wade was nothing more than an appetizer. Meaning that LeBron was this, freak of nature and Dwayne Wade was just some little 20-point per game scorer. That's what he said on the show. So you can't really take the guy too serious. With that being said, I hate this narrative because I think that this narrative has in many ways exposed every chink in boxing armor. Because let's not kid ourselves. The promoters and the shadiness and the corruption that's plagued the sport. That's what's held boxing back from being on that mainstream level and being that being what it once was, which was in the 90s and even for parts of the early 2000s one of the most popular sports in America. But ever since the boxing business has always been corrupt, but it seems like as time has went on, the corruption has just grown and grown and grown over the years, and now it's to a point where UFC is gaining all the notoriety seemingly from the mainstream media, all the headlines from the mainstream media. Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor fought on Saturday, and that was a fight everybody was talking about. And Errol Spence fought on Sunday, and nobody was talking about it, but somehow the Errol Spence fight still did 6 million views on NBC. I mean, granted it was after the Olympics, but still, boxing still did 6 million views in America on television. So with that being said, boxing is not it's not as like it was back in the Holyfield, Tyson, Riddick Bowe days, but it's still very popular in America. It still has its fan base, and I think when you talk about UFC, when you talk about boxing, I know there's plenty of people who like boxing and UFC at the same time, but the fact of the matter is the UFC audience and the boxing audience are two completely different types of people. The UFC audience, and this is not to play the race card or trying to do any of that. This is just stating facts. UFC audience is predominantly the demographic of the 18 to 34-year-old Caucasian male. That's the bulk of the UFC fan base. I'm not saying there's not black UFC fans or Hispanic UFC fans, because I know plenty of people who are black and Hispanic who love the UFC. But the majority of what that sport gets its money off of is the 18-year-old or 34-year-old Caucasian males. Boxing, on the other hand, the demographics are a lot more diverse. You have, obviously, the money fighters in the sport are always Mexican fighters, Puerto Rican fighters. So there you have a big, a strict change in diversity there as far as demographics go. And then you have a lot of black people, a lot of black people watch boxing too. They buy fights too. So with that being said, the core audience for both of them are just way different. So to declare that boxing is dead, I think Colin Cowherd is speaking, number one, from his own perspective, maybe because that's what appeals more to him. Because for him to say that that's the best fight he's watched in 20 years, that's ridiculous, because the same things he said about McGregor and Diaz, that fight had a lot of life lessons and it showed courage and toughness and heart and determination. There's plenty of fights in boxing that exemplify that as well. I mean, look at 2001 when Diego Corrales fought Jose Luis Castillo. That was a great fight. You had Castillo who seemingly had Corrales on the brink of being knocked out, and the referee was this close to stopping the fight, but Corrales digged deeper and deeper after two knockdowns and got up the canvas to stop Jose Castillo in what was the fight of the year, and arguably one of the best boxing matches of the last 15 to 25 years as far as excitement goes. You had a fight like that. You had a fight like Arturo Gatti and Mickey Bordonato's trilogy. That was 12 rounds every fight of just all-out war. You can't tell me you can't use the same characteristics for Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward. The only way you couldn't use them is if you weren't aware of it. And honestly, Colin Cowherd doesn't strike me as a guy who follows boxing. So there it is. And not just that. Let's keep in mind that Fox Sports has a huge stake in the UFC. Yes, I know they cover some of the PBC fights, but the stake that they have in boxing is not as big as the stake you have in UFC. I mean, they signed a 7-year deal. I believe it was earlier this year, or not earlier this year. It was back in, that was a while ago actually. It was around 2011. My bad, not this year, earlier this year. But back in 2011, they struck a 7-year deal to televise, which got into a big bidding war, and they're getting $100 million annually. They're paying $100 million annually to host these fights for the UFC. So with that being said, of course Fox is going to big up the UFC to the point where they are going to try and make boxing fans twist the perception of boxing fans to where the boxing fans are like, yeah, what, boxing is dead, and then those fans are more inclined to then buy their product. Makes sense from a business standpoint to do such a thing. But what makes no sense to me is, how can you say boxing is dead when you spent the whole minute comparing McGregor Diaz to a match in Ali and Frazier? I mean, to compare McGregor to Muhammad Ali has to be one of the most egregious, most stupid things I've seen in a very long time. From and I've heard from anybody, not just sports media personality, but sports fans in general. Because McGregor, while he's popular in this day, while he's popular right now, he's not the kind of athlete that's going to transcend 50 years from now. Ali just passed away recently, and 100 years from now they'll be talking about Muhammad Ali. McGregor is relevant right now. There's a lot of gloss and shine over him, but there's nothing he's doing outside the ring or even inside the ring that's unprecedented to the point where you're going to be led to believe that people will be talking about him a century from now. So with that being said, I think Colin Cowherd is coming from a place of, first of all, extreme ignorance. Number two, pushing an agenda by the Fox network that has a huge stake in the UFC. And yeah, man, it sickens me to see this narrative being pushed. Do I think boxing has a lot of things it's got to fix? Of course, there's no question about it. But to say that it's dead when the day after that exact fight he was just talking about, the next boxing fight that was on in America did over 5 million views, did 6 million views actually. Point is proven right there. So just want to get that out there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Take the time to subscribe, and you can love me or you can hate me when I'm just a kid from Dania. So until next time, take care, guys.